Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History, U.S. History Edition. I apologize for my voice today. I seem to be losing my voice a little bit right now. But today we're going to kick off talking about World War I. And in particular, we're going to talk a little bit about how World War I starts today. And we'll talk also a little bit about the early parts of the fighting as we get into this unit. Where I want to start, though, is with a quick question, and then I want you to kind of think about this as your own opinion. Do alliances between countries help prevent war or make them more likely to occur? Certainly take some time to think about this. We're going to talk about how alliances played a role in helping to begin and perhaps expand the breadth or the amount of countries involved through the alliance system in World War I. So, we're going to start by identifying particularly how 5 major factors contribute to the outbreak of World War I. And certainly we'll get into things like nationalism and militarism, the alliance system. We'll talk about the balance of power. Of course, I have to mention Franz Ferdinand. And of course, we'll get into World War I technology today. But probably the event that is at the core of World War I is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, Franz Ferdinand is set to be the next heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And in 1914, his assassination takes this delicate balance and really kind of turns it on its side. Excuse me. And that instability in Europe is actually going to lead to war. And so as we look at this, there are other factors, and I want to make sure that we address those. So one of the things that had been growing in Europe, actually around the world, is this concept of nationalism, which is this intense loyalty that you feel towards your country or a group of people. And oftentimes it involves a feeling of superiority. Now, nationalism and patriotism are 2 very different things. You can be patriotic and love your country and support your country, but not have those feelings of superiority that usually come with nationalism. And it's the promotion of those interests above all others. You can be patriotic and still understand that your country needs to work with others in order for the benefit of everybody. And so this really encouraged new nations like Italy and Germany to really unify as they started to establish their power in the world. Because remember, Germany, when it comes to colonizing and being a big player on the world stage, like Britain or France, for example, they're kind of behind the game. And so they know that they need to move quickly in order to get back up into the ranks. And Germany took a long time to unify. And so it took much longer than, say, Britain or France did. It also, during this time period, encouraged ethnic groups. Typically, these are minorities. Sometimes they speak a different language. They follow different customs, like different religions, than the majority of people who live within a country. And in some ways, this nationalism actually encouraged them to start to break away from existing nations and seek their own independence. And a great example of this in World War I time period is the Slavs, particularly in Austria-Hungary. Also thrown in here certainly is this idea that European nations, as they competed for colonies, they started to strengthen their militaries and created an atmosphere that we would call militarism, which is the building up of your military strength within a country, and a lot of times takes away from other priorities and increases the importance of the military within your country. So as militaries build up, they also understood that they can't do it alone. And so what comes with this is countries coming together in the alliance system. And this is the essentially countries coming together for defense agreements with each other in order to ensure their success. And so by 1914, beginning of World War I, kind of 2 major systems established. You've got Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy that form what's called the Triple Alliance. Then you've got Great Britain, France, and Russia, which form the Triple Entente. And an entente is an understanding among nations. This isn't exactly how the sides are going to work out. Particularly Italy is going to actually fight with Britain and France as well as Russia as the war gets started. But the whole purpose of these alliances was to essentially create a balance of power to kind of help keep the peace. So balance of power is that kind of distribution among nations that no one single nation can dominate or interfere. That if you're a smaller country who's got less, perhaps military power or, wealth from colonization, you can ally yourself with other powerful countries, and collectively together you can challenge other bigger empires or nations with more military power. So it was a way of trying to balancing the scales. So when we look at those alliances, again, the Triple Alliance, you've got Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. Here kind of right down the center of Europe. And then you've got the UK, aka Britain, France, and Russia kind of rounding out the Triple Entente. So who are the members of the Triple Alliance? Pause the video if you need to, but best answer here is C. That'd be Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And it's going to mostly stay intact, although, like we said, Italy is going to end up switching sides. So why is the big question? Why assassinate him? So Gavrilo Princip is a Serbian nationalist, and Serbians wanted independence. They're a great example of a Slavic group that wanted independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he, as a part of a group called the Black Hand, and actually partially is there by accident because Franz Ferdinand and his driver makes a wrong turn, and Princip happens to be on the street and shoots him along with his wife at basically, very close range. And so he ends up assassinating him because he wants to essentially help bring down this Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he wants to unite the Slavic people together. And he thinks by doing this, he can upset the balance of power. And he does, in many ways, light the powder keg. Now, keep in mind, the alliance system, militarism, nationalism, and certainly ethnic groups vying for more independence have already caused tensions. But that event is really what is going to light the powder keg, so to speak. So what does that mean? Well, about a month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary decides that they're going to declare war on Serbia. And that happens in July of 1914. And that begins what we would basically call a chain reaction through the alliance system of countries getting involved in a war. So Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia, that brings up some attention because Serbia is very closely connected with Russia. It's also a majority Slavic nation, so coming there to protect their fellow Slavs. So Russia is going to militarize and essentially move to try to help support Serbia. Basically, they're declaring war. Germany in tail is going to join because they are allies with Austria-Hungary. They're going to declare war on Russia. Now, likewise, they're going to declare war on France because they know that France is an ally of Germany. And, of course, then France is going to fight and declare war on Germany. Now, Germany has kind of two choices. They can go directly to the French border. That would be predominantly the southern border. Or they can try to catch the French off guard by going through Belgium. Belgium's a neutral country. However, they have their own alliances, including with Great Britain. And so Germany decides to invade neutral Belgium on, again, the idea that they could surprise, and also it gets them closer to Paris. And so they invade. Well, that brings in Great Britain, who's an ally of Belgium. And it was largely going to stay out of the war. But again, they had an alliance with Belgium. This one's a little bit more of a secret alliance, which also plays a role in starting World War I. So coming back to this kind of, again, we start this chain reaction, but at the beginning, why was Franz Ferdinand assassinated? Pause here if you need to, but let's take a look. It's really to help bring down the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and again, wanting to unite the Serbs. The second part, let's talk about how militarism now contributes to the outbreak of World War I. And I apologize, this video is going to be a little bit longer. I really wanted to help kind of build a foundation for World War I. And in order to do that, I got to kind of cover my bases on how the war starts, but also how it's fought. And that's kind of what we're going to get into here. So, very quickly, looking at the two sides, you have the Allied powers and you have the Central powers. Let's start with the Allied powers. So the Allied powers include Great Britain, they include France, and they include Russia, all members of the Triple Entente. That one stayed intact. Later on, Japan's going to join along with Italy. And again, that's a change from the Triple Alliance. Also, of course, later, the United States. We're not there yet, though. The United States comes in much later. We'll talk about why a little bit as we go through World War I. But you can kind of think about the United States. If you're a baseball fan, they're kind of the closer. They're going to come in to kind of help seal victory. The Central powers are Germany, Austria-Hungary, so again, two members of the Triple Alliance. And then you've got the Ottoman Empire, who again are kind of looking to try to preserve in modern-day Turkey and Syria, Jordan, trying to essentially, Israel too, Palestine as well, looking to preserve any kind of stake they have. They're certainly starting to deteriorate at this point. So after defeating Belgium, of course, Belgium was caught off guard. They don't have a large military. Germany then goes to invade France. Well, British and French troops stopped the German advance at the Marne River near Paris. And of course, Paris is going to be a very important part of this war. And so for 3 years, these opposing armies basically faced off against each other in trenches. One of the highlights and most important aspects of World War I is trench warfare. We're going to talk about that, especially more in depth. And really, neither side was really advancing. And so this ends up being a war that is going to have a lot of casualties, partially because of the way it's fought and the conditions that people are fighting in, but also certainly there's going to be a lot of stalemates because of the strategy, because of the trench warfare. So Gallipoli, Verdun, Somme, Château-Thierry, the Second Battle of the Marne. Several of these take place in France, certainly like Meuse-Argonne. The Argonne takes place in Germany. But you're going to have a lot of battles taking place on this front. Certainly early on, Germany was actually having some success against the Russians. And we'll talk too, because Russia's got a couple things going on during World War I. We'll talk about why that front ends up being a little bit more quiet and why the Western Front tends to be more active. So these trenches are quite a complex system. They're not just digging a ditch and standing in it. You've got the front lines, and men would certainly rotate through these different parts. And then you'd have, connecting parts in which, you'd have support trends. We also have biplanes in this time period, which are often used to check and assess movement before an attack. You've got concrete blocks, which often house machine guns, which is one of the big technologies, reserve trenches, and then, of course, you've got your long-range artillery. And so, you've also got underground for communications, especially telegram, and, of course, the area in between enemy trenches was known as no man's land, which, again, no man would dare enter because of the danger of, for example, the machine guns. So these are really quite a complex system, and certainly there's an advanced rotation system to try to keep people, who have been in the front line to go to reserve to get, some rest, and then in support. And so there's always different levels to kind of help ensure success. And so you can see, using devices to look over because you didn't want to look too far over with your head because, of course, snipers are a big part of this. Very recently, there's a film called 1917, which for my students who are in person will watch part of the opening sequence, but it certainly helps to somewhat highlight some of trench warfare life. Now, for my students especially, make sure if you want to watch this film, you get your parents' permission. I believe it's R. Could be PG-13, I don't remember. But make sure you're getting permission. So 1916, there's a very important battle. It's called the Battle of Verdun. And it's probably one of the longest and bloodiest battles of the war. And in that time period, more than 750,000 French and German soldiers end up losing their life. It's actually one of the most costly battles in world history, and ends up, again, playing a really important role in demonstrating kind of the devastation of this war. We'll get more into that in a little bit. But there's a great historian out there who said we went into World War I on horseback, and we left in airplanes and tanks. And it really does describe how we went in using, strategies like with cavalries, but machine guns very quickly made that obsolete. And we started to using more technology like airplanes, or specifically biplanes and tanks. So technology really forces a massive change in how this war is fought. So you're going to see improved cannons, and other artillery is going to be able to fire large shells, greater distances, certainly, again, much more longer range. You're going to see better rifles. You're going to have better accuracy for soldiers. You're also going to see the introduction of chemical warfare, particularly mustard gas in World War I. And that poison gas could kill or injure people, but it was also quite volatile. Any change in the wind, and you could go from a weapon that is being used to try to attack your enemy to one that could be used against you. So gas masks were certainly a part of this too. You also have some of the first armored tanks, starting, of course, with the Germans, and then later on with like the British and the French, that were able to cross battle lines. It did not have a very long range, but certainly they could fire at close range. Certainly you would have seen, especially with some of the early ones, they were getting stuck in trenches. But the whole goal was to try to use this to help soldiers advance, and also certainly to cross over enemy lines. You're also going to start to see the first fighter planes being equipped with machine guns, which adds a whole new dimension. Planes are going to play a much bigger role in World War II, but they're used largely for observation initially in World War I. But once they get machine guns, you will start to see a little bit more air warfare. Certainly, Manfred von Richthofen, also known as the Red Baron, becomes a very well-known pilot. Later ends up getting shot down, I believe, by the French, but was able to gain some renown for his skills as a pilot. Certainly also marine warfare is a part of this too. German submarines known as U-boats began to sink ships, particularly carrying supplies to Britain. We'll talk about how, and again, U-boats are those German submarines, both used in World War I and World War II. They do end up changing the course of the war, and also certainly also play a role in why the United States gets involved. Not the only reason, but it's certainly part of it. So certainly this war was quite devastating. Eventually, you're going to see some advancements in technology, and we'll talk a little bit more about the experience of World War I a little bit later in this unit. Where I want to wrap up, though, just a kind of a quick look. We talked about some of the new technologies, and want to look at these and say which one is not from World War I. So is it poison gas, nuclear weapons, armored tanks, or fighter planes? Pause if you need to. But the best answer here is nuclear weapons. That will come in World War II. So more to come on that later. Thank you so much for listening. This is going to wrap up that first section. I know this one got a little bit long. There's a lot to kind of lay the foundation, but I appreciate you listening. For my students, make sure you ask any questions that you have. Again, make sure you're following along with the guided notes. For those of you who are just listening, hopefully we help give you a little bit of a foundation to the beginnings of World War I. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.